If you dust off your rares binder from like 20 years ago, chances are you're gonna find a ton of Commander legal cards that just don't make the cut anymore. But here at the Jank Center, we want to help breathe new life into old forgotten cards of yore, specifically legendary creatures, and thus was born a new series, Long Lost Commanders. This series and all subsequent videos are brought to you by the EDH Jank Center, of course your EDH safe space and home for everything Commander and everything Jank, and I am your host Jordan. Now let's dive in. And the Commander that will help us ring in our inaugural build is Chisei, Heart of Oceans. Chisei is a 2/2 legendary creature spirit from Betrayers of Kamigawa. It has flying, and at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Chisei, Heart of Oceans unless you remove a counter from a permanent you control, and it's a 4/4. So this thing wants to stay on the battlefield, but the only way it can do so is by having us remove a counter from a permanent we control. This means we are going to have to take a look at things that gain value from removing counters, and my first thought went to sagas. But in the process of artisanally crafting this deck by hand, I thought Chisei lended itself more so to a Secret Voltron vibe. So that's what we're going to do. Control the board and outvalue our opponents with sagas and other shenanigans while we sneakily get Chisei absolutely creatine pilled enough to 1 or 2 shot our opponents with commander damage. Will this be successful? Not always, but will it be fun and challenging? Absolutely. So let's check out how we're going to try and accomplish this by breaking down 15 of the selections I made for this build and how they function within the deck. At the time of making this video, the deck comes in at around $76.11. It would have been more had we included Mystic Remora, but I'm a hipster. I'm not like other girls, so I didn't want to include it. It felt too obvious. And as always, the deck can be found on my Archidect, which is located in the description, kiddos. All right. Let's move on to our first card of the day, which is Kiora Bests the Sea God, 5/blue enchantment saga from Theros Beyond Death. It says, as the saga enters and after your draw step, add a lore counter, important, sacrifice after the third. And the first ability says, create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token with hexproof. Number 2 says, tap all non-land permanents target opponent controls. They don't untap during their controller's next untap step. And the third chapter is, gain control of target permanent and opponent controls and untap it. When my patrons were discussing Chisei in the Discord, this card was the first thing that came to my mind. I have always loved this card since my arena days and have always wanted to find a home for it. And while it does have homes in plenty of other decks, I think Chisei is the only one that truly provides everything it needs to thrive. And by everything, I don't mean a warm meal and new sheets to sleep in. I mean a way to abuse those abilities because, brother, those abilities are game changers. Being able to repeatedly slam down 8/8s, tap down someone's board, or gain control of someone's favorite doohickey is unreal value, even if we only get to do it twice. On its own, this thing is really good, but when paired with Chisei, it really starts to shine. Next up, we're going with a land. It's Dark Depths, legendary Snowland from Dominaria Remastered. It says, Dark Depths enters the battlefield with 10 ice counters on it. You can pay 3 at instant speed to remove an ice counter from it, and when Dark Depths has no ice counters on it, sacrifice it. If you do, create Merit Lage, a legendary 2020 black avatar creature token with flying and indestructible. Jesus. So I wanted to wait until later in the list to talk about this, since I do want to talk about the mid-range control and Voltron aspects of this deck, but I was just too excited to pass up talking about our biggest alternate win con in the list. A Dark Depths win is something that every Magic player has dreamt of at least once in their life. Whether that's a nightmare or not for them is up to their personal experience with it. But listen, will we be able to flip it into Merit Lage every game? Absolutely not. But the few times we do will make it worth the slot in the list, I promise. And honestly, the more I think about it, the more I believe this is actually more viable than I think. You can use other counter removers. You can make non-legendary copies of Chisei. You can run things like Paradox Haze to double up on Chisei triggers. You get the picture. Now, don't get too excitable, kiddos, because we've still got 13 more cards to yap about. Let's move on to our patron selection. Woo! Today's selection was added to the list by Garen and Reverend 8. Thank you both for mentioning this card. Absolutely appreciate you guys so much. Now let's talk about Snowfall, which is a 2/blue enchantment, and this is old as hell, so we are going to read the Oracle text here, which says, cumulative upkeep blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an age counter, important, on this permanent. Then sacrifice it, unless you pay its upkeep cost for each age counter on it. Whenever an island is tapped for mana, its controller may add an additional blue. If that island is snow, its controller may add an additional 2 blue instead. Spend this mana only to pay cumulative upkeep costs. Now, this is a card that would just not have a home anywhere else but here, I feel like. This card helps us pay for other cumulative upkeep costs on the field if we need it, or it can just help pay for itself, which, you know, is not the most efficient thing in the world, but I still think that cards like this deserve a home too, and that home has to be Chisei. And now let's move on to Inventive Iteration, 3 and a blue enchantment saga from Neon Dynasty Kamigawa. It says, Chapter 1, return up to 1 target creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand. Chapter 2 is return an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. If you can't, draw a card. And Chapter 3 is exile the saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control, and it flips into Living Breakthrough, an enchantment creature moonfolk with flying. It says, whenever you cast a spell, your opponents can't cast spells with the same mana value as that spell until your next turn, and it's a 3/3. And here is one of our more important sagas, folks. Our deck is predicated on controlling the board in the early and mid game and then smacking people in the face in the late game with a beefed up Chisei. Being able to repeatedly bounce problem creatures or return certain artifacts to our hand from the yard is so clutch and allows us room to breathe while we set up our board. Then when we get tired of repeating steps 1 and 2, we can flip the card and then we have some like chill stacks. Now, those who watch the channel know I am usually not someone who plays or builds like this, but I made this call because I think some form of board control is necessary to get this deck humming like it should. Sorry about it, but also I'm not sorry. Rules are meant to be broken. So while you contemplate what that means for your own life, let's move on to Scroll of Eildor, 2 and a blue enchantment saga from the Lord of the Rings set. It says, Chapter 1, gain control of up to 1 target artifact for as long as you control Scroll of Eildor, the ring tempts you. Chapter 2, tap up to 2 target creatures, put a stun counter on each of them. And Chapter 3, draw a card for each tapped creature target opponent controls. In the same vein as the previous selection, this card is going to be one of our main ways of controlling the board and making sure we don't die before Chisei's done getting suited up and jacked. I'm most interested in the stun counters being used over and over again, but I think it's cool that we can easily max out a ring bearer if we use ability 1 enough times. And that third ability 2 is really awesome and can net you a metric butt ton of cards in the right situation. All right, now let's take a look at Time of Ice, 3 in a blue enchantment saga. This one is from Dominaria. It says chapters 1 and 2. Tap target creature an opponent controls. It doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as you control Time of Ice. And then chapter 3 says return all tapped creatures to their owner's hands. 3 sagas in a row. 3 ways to bide us time for setup and for clearing a pathway for Chisei to swing out. Honestly, not much else to say here. This is a pretty simple tech, but I felt it was important to mention a decent amount of sagas out of fear some of them would text me about it later. Now let's move on to someone cooler, like Mutation, which is they're a cool card, but they're also old as hell. So we're gonna read the Oracle text here. It says 2 and a blue creature human wizard. It says cumulative upkeep 1 mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an age counter on this permanent, then sacrifice it unless you pay its upkeep cost for each age counter on it, and you can tap it. To put a music counter on target creature. If it doesn't have at the beginning of your upkeep, destroy this creature unless you pay 1 mana for each music counter on it. It gains that ability, and it's a 1/3 BB. Which is Big Butt Gang for the uninitiated. Now, let's talk about Mutation. This is a fun card that is not a saga, but is very unique and a fun way to accomplish a similar task. So, chat, is this stacks? I honestly think it is, which makes me a little ashamed, but also kind of exhilarated. I might wake up the morning after a game night with regret if I use this card in real life, but I honestly think it's so important to the strategy we're going for here. If there is a specific creature in Chisei's way, a flyer, for example, this can be a big way of making an opponent pay for having that defense up. And hopefully over time, the cost becomes too great to bear and they are forced to get rid of the creature, paving the way for a cheeky Chisei punch to the face. And by the way, we don't even have to worry about cumulative upkeep because Chisei and friends take care of all of that. Speaking of Chisei's besties, let's take a look at a few of them, starting with Ferroed, which is a 3 colorless mana artifact creature insect from 5th Dawn, and it says, Ferroed is unblockable. Whenever Ferroed deals combat damage to a player, you may remove a counter from target permanent, and it's a 1/1. When we're doing a build that heavily focuses on our general, like this one, it's super important to have redundancy in our list. This is a contingency plan against our commander being heavily focused down once people catch on to what is happening. If this happens, sometimes it will and sometimes it won't, then we need to have other cards that help us do the same thing our commander lets us do. In this case, we want to still be able to get value out of our sagas and cumulative upkeep cards, and of course, Dark Depths, my beloved. So that's where this guy comes in. Don't be fooled by the fact that this looks like it was ripped right out of Hueco Mundo, if you know you know, and put onto a Magic card. This thing slaps in our build, brother. Not only does it allow for incremental counter removal for our cumulative upkeep cards as well as our sagas, but it is also unblockable, making it an excellent secondary target for our auras and equipment. This card is an absolute all-timer, and hey, bonus points if you did recognize the niche Bleach joke I made. If you're a Bleach person, hey, sound off in the comments, and while you expose yourself as a nerd, I'm going to start yapping about the next card, which is Power Conduit, which is a 2-drop colorless artifact from the list. It says tap to remove a counter from a permanent you control. Choose one. Put a charge counter on target artifact, or put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. This is another simple tech here, so we won't spend too much time, but man, oh man, I love what this card does in our build. It helps us achieve the deck's main goals. We can remove counters from stuff and make something beefy. Ideally, this would be our commander, but it doesn't have to be. If we're in a pinch, we can slap it onto Ferroed and call it a day. This does everything we want, all in a beautiful 2-mana package. We very much love to see it. All right, now let's talk about Spark Double, which is a 3 and a blue creature illusion from Ravnica Remastered. It says you may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, it enters with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker, and it isn't legendary important, and it starts out as a 0/0. Hey, so another way to knock multiple counters off stuff in one turn is to make multiple copies of our commander, and usually that's not possible because of the legend rule, but luckily, this clone allows us to make a non-legendary copy of whatever it's copying, making it perfect to clone our general. And a nice little bonus is that we get to then put a +1/+1 counter on the clone, making it a 5/5 flyer, which is never something to be laughed at. And now we're going to take a look at card number 11 on the list. It's Lelay Line Axe, 4 colorless mana artifact equipment from Foundations. It says, if this card is in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield. It also says, equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has double strike and trample, and the equip cost is 3. This is one of my favorite cards from Foundations, and I'm very stoked to have a chat about it. Most of how we win in this deck will be through commander damage, so we want to make sure we have formidable weapons at our disposal, kiddos. A buff, double strike, and trample should do the trick in most cases, and the icing on the cake here is the fact that if we pull it in our opening hand, we get to just start the game with a free equipment. I will never not put this in any Voltron deck from here on out. Very cool, and I love the reference to all the different ley lines throughout Magic's history. Very cheeky touch by the designers here. All right, now let's go for Stratathe next, which is 3 colorless mana artifact equipment from Scars of Mirrodin. It says, Imprint. When Stratathe enters the battlefield, search your library for a land card, exile it, then shuffle your library. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land on the battlefield with the same name as the exiled card, and its equip cost is 3. I told myself I wasn't gonna crash out about this, but bro, I have been wanting to slot this into a build for such a long time, and it geeks me that Chisei has become a home for so many cards that so often fall to the wayside or are left in people's bulk boxes or rare binders. Stratathe in a monocolored deck is an absolute unit, dude. This thing comes out of nowhere and can make Chisei a 15/15 or something crazy. And remember that this includes other players' lands as well, not just ours. So Chisei could be even bigger depending on what decks we are facing off against, which I think is a fun little bit of variance. All right, now let's look at card number 13, which is Unstable Mutation. 1 blue mana, enchantment aura from Ultimate Masters. It says enchanted creature gets +3/+3, and at the beginning of the upkeep of enchanted creature's controller, put a -1/-1 -1 counter on that creature. So this is a really awesome inclusion that I found from stalking Reddit forums because Chisei is so niche of a build. It's a pretty simple tech, but man is it effective. 1 mana for being able to turn Chisei into a 3-shot kill is so clutch. And then on top of that, what would usually be a downside in the form of the -1 counter is actually a non-factor for us since we can very easily remove that counter consistently with various tools in the deck. Very cool, and all for 8 cents. Sign me the F up, baby. All right, don't hate me, but now we're gonna take a look at grafted exoskeleton, 4 colorless mana artifact equipment from Scars of Mirrodin. It says, equip creature gets +2/+2 and has infect, which means it deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters and to players in the form of poison counters. Notably, a player needs only 10 poison counters to lose the game, and it also says, whenever grafted exoskeleton becomes unattached from a permanent, sacrifice that permanent, and the equip cost is 2. Control stacks now infect? I feel like I'm having an identity crisis, dude, but also, in a deck with a lot of moving parts and a number of weaknesses, you have to be able to close out games, and infect is something that can really help us bridge the gap between decks that are, on paper, way more powerful and efficient, and our deck. You can run all sorts of insane stuff, but sometimes you really can't do much against a couple hits from a beefed up infect creature. Okay, now that I've gotten through talking about all of this stacks and infect, I'm gonna go take a quick shower and have my clone finish out this video. See you guys. Okay, hello everyone. So I am here to replace Jordan, and we're gonna talk about Schema Thief next, which is a 3 in a blue creature Vidalcan Rogue Artificer from March of the Machine Commander. It says flying, and whenever Schema Thief deals combat damage to a player, create a token that's a copy of target artifact that player controls, and it's a 3/3. Okay, so for this last slot, I kind of wanted to include cards that don't necessarily directly synergize with our overall goal, but do provide some ancillary support. Schema Thief is a good blocker or attacker, being a 3/3 flyer, but it also has the potential to net us some insane value over the course of the game. Being able to make token copies of Soul Ring will be very useful, obviously, but I personally am dreaming of being able to make a token copy of other equipment and equip those copies to Chisei. For that kind of potential, I am super willing as the deck builder here to give up a slot for this kind of inclusion. All right, and just like that, we have made it to the end of this week's video, kiddos. What were your favorite inclusions in the deck? What cards would you slot into this list? Did I miss anything? I'm always down there in the comments, so come on down and have a chat with me. And hey, if you'd like to join the EDH Jank Center Discord community, watch these videos a day early, submit cards for the patron selection, and play spell table games with me and other patrons every month, consider signing up for the Patreon in the description below. We've got a beautiful Discord community and affordable entry points, so come on in and get janked. And hey, if you don't have the funds for monetary support, that's totally chill. You can just like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell for more Commander stuff and more jank. All right, guys, that's it for me. I'll see you on the next video, and don't forget, the spirit of the format is the gathering.